All right, today we're doing an interview with Leonard Gerald Wright. It's my dad, and I'm John Robert Wright. And we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the Wright family and do somewhat of a life interview. So I'd like to start at the place that you should start, and that's about as far back as we can remember, and that would be Mr. Wright's great-grandfather, Robert Bullock.
Well, Robert Bullock graduated from, they called it Chapel Hill in those days. It was University of North Carolina. He graduated in 1845, I'm told. And he accepted a job in Ocala as a school teacher. So on his way to Ocala, he stopped by, and as he did in those days, they would stay 2 or 3 days when they'd stop over. Well, anyhow, he met Amanda Waterman, whose family owned the Waterman Steamship Company, and he fell in love with her, or they fell in love with each other. He stayed there about a month, I understand, and on his way to Ocala. But anyway, they were married later, not at that time, but later on. He went to Ocala. He was in the militia. He fought against the Seminole Indians when they were at war in Florida, and that was the beginning of his military career. So, and later on, after they got married and they lived in Ocala, Civil War came along. He was I think he was a major or a colonel when he went in, and at the Battle of Lookout Mountain in Chattanooga, where he was in charge of Finley's brigade. One of my granddaughters is named Finley. But anyway, he was captured and then traded he became a brigadier general, and he was captured by the North and swapped for some prisoners at Lookout Mountain. And he was also wounded. I've seen letters written where they would write them like, just normal. They'd write them, and then they would have in more paper, so they'd turn them on the side and write over that. And I've seen those letters. And his home in Ocala is owned now by the state. It's a museum. And it's on Ocklawaha Avenue. I don't know the number, but I've seen it, and I've looked in it. It's been so long I can't remember. But anyway, it's on Ocklawaha Avenue in Ocala.
So they had a bunch of children.
They had 12 children. 8 of them survived. And one of those children was my grandmother, who married Harry Wright from Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And my mother was a Wright and married a Wright.
So
we're full of Wrights.
2 Wrights make a Wright.
Yeah, 2 Wrights make a Wright.
So eventually your grandparents moved to Macon.
Yes, that couple did. They moved to Macon. Then my daddy's mother, they were from Birmingham. He was, and he went to Auburn, and my dad went to Auburn. They all graduated. My uncle Rudolph went to Auburn. Let's see, they all graduated in civil engineering, and my grandfather was a good friend of Mr. Flagler, and he was the chief surveyor for all those railroads that Mr. Flagler built in Florida. So I forget the year, I think he was like 58 when he was thrown from a horse. He was riding along checking something, and a rattlesnake swooped the horse, and it threw him, and he broke his leg, and 5 days later, 4 or 5 days later, he died from gangrene. They didn't know how to handle it in those days, and they were out in the out in the boondocks, so he didn't have any medical treatment. And
What are some of your memories of your grandparents?
Well, I don't remember my grandfather on my mother's side very well, but as I say, my grandfather on my father's side was, he died from that accident when he was 58. So I never knew him, but I did know the other grandparents, and I knew Geraldine, who it was on my father's side. She was from Macon, or it ended up in Macon, and I knew her very well.
So your name, Leonard Gerald, comes from a combination of...
My grandfather on my dad's side and my grandmother on my dad's side.
That's pretty unique.
Yeah, that's where it came from.
Okay. Oh, I was going to ask you about any kind of church relationships that your grandparents had. Were they members of
Well,
church?
on the Bullock side, they were Episcopalians, but when they got to Macon, they all changed over to Methodists, and we were all Methodists. So my mother was a Methodist, and my dad was a Methodist, and we were all Methodists. My grandmother lived right down from Westland was on College Street. It is now built out in Bibb County, but in those days, my mother went to Westland, and it was in the town of Macon. So, and incidentally, my mother roomed with Madam Shanghai Shek from China. She was a student, one of the Sung sisters. And the father, he had made a lot of money. The son, Mr. Sung, he sold Bibles in China, and his desire was that his two girls go to Westland. So he had them sent back to Westland, and my mother and Ruth Brown from from Atlanta, they had a suite. And my mother had one time, I remember in the summer of 40, after I got out of the Navy, she went over to Taiwan and visited for about a month with Madam Shanghai Shek. She called her by her first name. I cannot remember what it is. But the Generalissimo, he moved out of China over to Taiwan. And that's where she went and visited her.
Okay. So your mom really never moved too far away from Macon. She was born in Macon. She ended up going to Wesleyan College in Macon. And your dad was actually from Taylor County.
He was Taylor County, where Butler. That's where they had that big plantation. And he was born there, and he lived in Macon. They had a place in Macon, so I guess they wasn't far away. They were back and forth.
Yeah, they did farming over there in Butler.
Yeah.
Big farmers.
Oh yeah, peach farmers.
So how did they meet? Do you know how they met?
Well, he obviously met her in Macon when she was at Westland. That's when they got married after she graduated. So I don't know the details.
What did your father end up doing?
My father was a friend of Sam Murray, who was Mr. Henry Ford's secretary. Not young Henry Ford. I mean the old man. And so he had told Sam Murray that he would get whatever dealership he wanted, he would set it up for him. So he chose Miami. And being a friend of Henry Ford's, my dad inquired about a dealership in Tallahassee, and he said yes, if you wanted equipment you can have it. This was back in 1915. Wait, I mean, a long time. And he was on the way down to Moultrie, to Tallahassee, and then I don't know what happened. Maybe the mule died. I don't know. But anyhow, they ended up in Moultrie, and he said, "Well, I like it here. I'll just put a dealership here and not go to Tallahassee." So he did, and he ended up in Moultrie, which was only like 50 miles from Tallahassee, right on the border. And
So that was 19.
that was like in
60.
1915, as close as I can come, but it was before, during the war or before the war, I don't know.
Well, that was about when the automobile was invented.
No, it was back in a little before that.
They had,
They had then, I think the Model T came later.
right.
But anyhow, he had an interest in several other dealerships. One in Valdosta, I think, in Thomasville, and Quitman, Georgia. But anyway, he liked Moultrie better than he did any of the other places because it had good hunting. He loved to hunt. So
Okay.
he ended up there. That's where I was born.
So you were one of 4 children. You had an older sister, an older
older
brother.
sister and an older brother, and they both were born in Macon. But I was a twin, and we were born in 1924, September 30th, 1924, in Moultrie, after he had moved and set up his dealership and all that. But the other 2 children, the oldest, my sister was 8 years older, my brother was 4, they were born in Macon. And so that's where we got started.
Yeah. Do you have any memories of your sister, anything that comes to mind about Harriet?
Well, I remember she was a good athlete. She was a very good basketball player for Moultrie High School. My brother was not an athlete. We were the twins. We played all athletics you could possibly play. But my sister was, I remember her, she was the captain of the team, and she was a very good athlete. But my older brother, didn't participate. And I think it disappointed my dad that he didn't. But he didn't, so.
And then Harriet went on to college. Where did she go?
We went to Wesleyan.
She went to Wesleyan.
He graduated from Wesleyan. My older brother went to Georgia and graduated from Georgia.
Okay.
We went to Georgia Tech.
Now, when you all were younger, obviously y'all were twins, and twins do everything together. Tell me some things that y'all did together growing up.
Well, growing up in a small country town like that, we started playing football in the Pee Wee League. And when we were 6 years old, and we just started there and never quit. We played football, basketball, baseball, and then we went to Georgia Tech on football scholarships. Georgia wanted us to come. Wally Butts wrote us a letter and asked us, said that they would like to have us. I've got the letter still. But anyway, we went to Tech because Matt Tharp, who was a line coach at Georgia Tech, he was from Moultrie and played for Moultrie. Moultrie is a big Cocker County, like Cocker County. Now, it's not Moultrie. They won the state championship this year. So they are very rich in football. So I think we were destined to go to Georgia Tech, but then that was in 1941, then the war came.
Right.
And
Now, let me ask you a couple things about Moultrie before we get to Georgia Tech.
okay.
Just give me an indication of what you like to do as a kid when you were growing up, and maybe tell us a little bit about the town of Moultrie when you were a kid.
Well, Moultrie was a small town. It was like 20,000, but it was a big county. a lot of farming going on, agriculture. And a lot of every now and when the coaches would find a good player, somebody that might be a good player in the country, they'd put them on a school bus and let them come into town. But anyway, we went to camp, we worked, you know, it was a depression back in those days, in the 30s. Everybody worked to put food on the table. It wasn't like it is now, where the government was picking up the tab on everything and had food stamp. Didn't have any of that. We had to work. And we had a job after school. We had that farm up at Butler. We worked in peaches, and before I worked for J.C. Penney for every summer that I can remember. On Saturdays after school. And
Did you do chores around the house, things like that?
oh yeah, you had to do all that. They cut the lawn with a push mower, not a power mower. We didn't have a power mower. But anyway, we went to camp. I was a counselor, junior counselor at Camp Ridgecrest, which was out of Black Mountain, which was out of Asheville, about 15 miles. It was a beautiful place, and we went to camp from the time we were 14 through 17, and I ended up being a counselor, and I think I got paid $25 that year for being a counselor. They didn't pay you much, but they gave you your food and board.
Back to Moultrie, you and your brother, what did y'all do for activities and things as far as, you know, your hobbies and when you weren't playing sports?
We wasn't playing sports, we were hunting with our bird dogs. My dad had a pen in the back of the house with about 6 bird dogs in it. That was one of our chores, we had to feed those rascals. But anyway, it was great hunting around there. He liked dove hunting and quail hunting. And we participated in that with our dad, but we had to go to school and work, and we'd work it in somehow.
You said when you went dove hunting that it wasn't unusual for y'all to kill 200 dove at a time.
Well, we don't talk about that.
Well, that's back in the day.
Yeah, but that was when they had so many.
Tell me about the Depression and how that affected you, maybe some stories about that.
Well, we had, during the Depression, this was in the 30s, I remember on a cold night, these families would come around the back and knock on the door and ask for food, and that really impressed me, to see these little girls in flour sacks for dresses. And my mother took care of them. They put them up in the garage to sleep, and wherever in the house, wherever we could put them. But anyhow, there were a lot of people coming around asking for food. They just didn't have it. And it was tough times.
What about some of your friends that you had growing up in Moultrie, some of your childhood friends who?
Well, Charles Woodall was next door to me. We were friends all our lives. He moved to Albany. He ended up in the stores. Convenience stores. That's what he ended up in that. He ended up a multi-millionaire. And I helped him get started a little bit when I got out of the Navy. He didn't have any way of getting money, so we talked to the banker into loan him some money. He got started. But anyhow, we had to go to, the war was a big thing when I came along.
Well, then tell me about like Sherrod McCall. Wasn't he a good friend of yours?
Oh yes, the McCalls they were an extension of our family, or we were an extension of their family. It was 4 of them, 4 children, and 4 of us. And we would come over here to St. Simon's on our vacation, and rent a big house over there by the lighthouse. It's gone now, the ocean took it away. But that's been back, and they didn't have a bridge, they didn't have a causeway. They had the Emmeline and Hesse, the ferries, and we came on the Emmeline. And I remember my mother told me, I don't really remember it, but I was 5 years old, and she said we came on, they couldn't come on the causeway, didn't have one, so we came on the ferry. That's the first time that I remember anything about it. And they used to have wild ponies on Sea Island, and they had an old shell road and a wooden bridge. And I was not big enough, but my brother and the other boys, McCall, they'd catch those wild ponies and ride them on Sea Island. Somebody said the circus ship sank and they swam on shore. These ponies got off and ended up on Sea Island. That was like in 1928, and the cloister was not built, it was being built, the old cloister. So I saw both the old cloister and the new one being built. I remember seeing that old cloister. It was supposed to be a temporary thing, and it was temporary for a long time. So I remember that very well. And we would come every year over here practically every year for at least 2 or 3 weeks for our vacation.
That's exciting. So that's kind of a precursor to how you ended up over here eventually.
Oh yeah, we liked to come. And then when I married, Dorothy and I lived in Coral Gables, but we would come up here for a couple of weeks vacation, and she fell in love with it, and we finally in 1973 bought a house on Sea Island.
Well, tell me about your sports that you played in. Like, let's work our way up to high school. You played in.
Well, we started out when we were very young in the Pee Wee League, and Moultrie played in the Southwest South Georgia Football Association and basketball. We played Valdosta and Albany and Tifton and Thomasville and Waycross and Bainbridge and Cairo and all. That was the Southwest South Football Association. And we also played basketball and baseball. When we played, I only was played in 40 and 41. Some in 39, I wasn't old enough, I wasn't big enough. But anyhow, we played for really 3 years, but 2 years we were on
What positions did you and your brother play? Since y'all were twins, what positions did
Well, we played ends on the football team, and in basketball we played guards. And they had trouble guarding us because he wore number 3 and I wore number 8 on my bed. They'd get us confused and they'd leave us open a lot. We had a very good basketball team my senior year. We were 28-1. That's what our record was. I remember that very plainly. But anyway, JR, we played athlete. Seems that we were consumed by athletics. When it was football season, that's what we did. When it was basketball season, that's what we did. And then baseball season, we wound the thing up.
Well, it doesn't sound like it left a lot of time for girls. Did you have any
No, we had some girlfriends, but we didn't have any girls per se. I mean, we didn't have steady girls. But we had, go to the senior prom, junior senior prom. You had to get a date, and I'd get one of the McCall girls, or one of the Barbara Moore, or Betty Mann, or one of those girls. They were friends. They wasn't sweethearts. So, but I guess some of the boys, but I didn't have time for that.
When did you learn how to drive? When you were young, real young, or?
I learned to drive on the farm up in Butler when I was 12. A truck. It was to haul peaches Well, they were in the field down to the warehouse, to the packing plant. That's where I learned to drive.
Did you have a car like at some age?
I didn't have a car till my daddy was a Ford dealer, and we didn't have a car in high school except the family car. If we went out on a date or something, we could take the family. But I don't recall owning a car till I got out of the Navy.
Nope. So, was your twin brother, I mean, would you say he was a better athlete than you? Or
I
was
say, yeah, he was. He was a better. He was, I don't know, he was a better, he liked basketball, and I liked football better than he did, but he was still better.
So you were recruited by Georgia, but you just had an allegiance to Georgia Tech, so that was kind of a...
Well, the reason we went to Georgia, Mac Thorpe, he was a line coach at Tech, and he played at Moultrie High, and he invited us every year to come. By the time we were 12 or 13, we would go up and spend the weekend with him and sit on the bench with the players, and then the next day they would all go swimming and exercise. We'd work out with them. It was already a slam dunk where we were going. We were going to Tech because of Mac Thorpe. And I think most of the schools knew that, but we did get some scholarship offers from Georgia and from Auburn.
So how big were you then? If you were a senior in high school, how big were you?
I wasn't very big. I weighed 170 pounds.
How tall were you?
I was 6'1".
That was pretty big for back then, huh?
I guess. I don't know. But we could run.
Yeah. And who was the coach at Tech at the time?
Coach Alexander was the head coach now. Bobby Dodd, who became head coach and was very infamous, he was assistant when I was there. So that was in 1942 and 43. But you have to realize that we lost a lot of players to the military.
So when you were a freshman at Georgia Tech, tell me about the transition from moving from a rural town to the city, the big city.
Well, I had been to Atlanta with my parents a number of times, but living there was different. First year we lived in a dormitory with the athletes. There was Howell, and we lived there with most of the freshman players. We all lived, it was just a walk up to the varsity. They didn't have the overpass and all like they do now. But we lived in Howell. Then the next year, I got in a fraternity, Phi Delta Theta, and we lived in the house. They let us move where we wanted to.
So why did you join Phi Delta Theta? I mean, I know your dad and your granddad were both Phi Delts. Is that the reason that you joined?
That probably had something to do with it, but my grandfather was a Phi Delta at Auburn, and my father, and Rudolph, my uncle, he was in there too. So there was three of them that were Phi Delta Thetas at Auburn, and I don't recall anybody else. And my brother was a Phi Delta Theta at Georgia, so we were just sort of destined to be a Phi Delta Theta, and it wasn't much of a decision for us to make.
So both you and your twin brother joined the fraternity?
Yeah.
Did he and y'all both lived in the fraternity house?
Yes.
What was that arrangement like?
The first year they had a dormitory room, and I think there was 6 or 7 of us lived in that room. And no, none of them are living now, but it was a big room, and it had beds, single beds, very comfortable. But I remember all the boys that lived in there, but we didn't have much time. We were playing. We were going to coaching class every night because we had to practice football or whatever we were playing. And in order to keep up with the studies, we'd go at 7 o'clock night stayed till about 10, and the professor, whoever they assigned for chemistry or physics, it wasn't easy. So we took what they call coaching classes in order to keep up.
Who were some of the fraternity brothers that you met at Auburn
At Auburn,
excuse me, at Georgia Tech? Who were some of the fraternity brothers that you met there?
well, there was quite a number from Albany that I knew. Mutt Manning, he was a center on the team. He was All-American. There was Corey brothers from Tifton. I can't, it's been 70-something years ago, and it's hard for me to remember.
Bill Turner from
Bill Turner from Columbus, he was one of my friends.
and then Sam Perry.
Sam Perry from Tifton, he was at Tech with me when I went to Miami.
So you met a lot of your friends there. And,
Oh, yeah.
So you were balancing the fraternity and football, and then all of a sudden the war comes along.
War came along in 41, and we were still in high school, but we went to Tech in the next month in 42. Because, see, we stayed over a year. We didn't have but 11 grades in Moultrie, and all the other schools had 12. So they allowed us to stay over. But we had already graduated from high school.
Okay. So some people were actually going to the war, and it sounds like you were losing players off your football team because they were having to go to the war. And then your brother was in the ROTC, is that correct?
Naval ROTC. I opted with being twins and brothers. They like to split you up because they had the Sullivan boys, 5 of them killed on one ship in the Navy. This was in the Battle of the Coral Sea or somewhere. I went out in the Pacific. So I went to Miami. I could have gone to several schools, but I said, well, if I have my choice, I'll go to Miami, University of Miami, and they had a football team. They had a very good football team, but they were playing other service teams. They were playing 176th Infantry in Fort Benning. They were playing the Sub-Chaser School up at Fort Pierce. They were playing. So I got in on that.
So the reason you went to Miami was to get your officer training?
They sent me down there for 3 months, no, 4.5 months. And I train at, they had a Sub-Chaser school at Miami. But that's not, I went to Miami on my way to Notre Dame to midshipman school. That's where I got my commission.
So this would have been
1943.
1943. So you spent, what, 6 months in Miami?
Uh-huh.
And then you played
Went
football.
to Notre Dame.
And then you went to Notre Dame in, what, June?
I went to Notre Dame in May of 44.
Okay, now, this is an important point. Your brother had already gone to...
He had gotten his commission from, the Navy needed officers. They were getting ready to invade Europe from England. So he had to change across from, he got his commission, trained up in New Jersey somewhere for amphibs, for whatever the name of that place.
the landing craft.
Landing craft. Well, anyhow, they got ready and they went over and they invaded at Omaha Beach was where he got killed. And they had several beaches, Omaha Beach, and I can't remember all of them.
But he operated, what did he do exactly?
He and this guy had 2 officers on a landing craft that carried, I think, around 40 to 50 Marines, and they would go, it would go ashore, drop you call it a LCT, landing craft tank. They carried a tank and some soldiers. They went back and forth 5 times, and on the 6th time, they got hit and killed all of them. Got hit by, I forget what it was. It wasn't a mine, it was hit by artillery shell.
So then he was how old when he was killed?
20.
And
No, he was 19, he would have been 20. He was an ensign, and he was second in command. There was a guy from Michigan, he roomed with Tom Harmon. Y'all don't remember him.
Yeah.
He roomed with Tom Harmon, and they had something in common. They're both football players. One was from Michigan, one from Georgia Tech.
So when did you find out about your brother? Where were you?
I was at Notre Dame in midshipman school in June. It was June 6, 1944 that he was killed. Well, I was at Notre Dame in midshipman school, and I didn't graduate. I didn't get out of there till September. Got my commission.
So how did that affect you, losing your twin brother?
Well, it had some impact. I mean, it didn't affect my ability to continue on as a officer in officer's training. But naturally, you lose your brother and your twin brother at that. It makes a difference.
So then they sent you where?
They sent me, I had orders when I got my commission, I had orders to go, we're getting ready to go into Lady Gulf. Lady Gulf was the biggest naval battle in the history of the United States. So in 1944, this was like September, October 44, we went in then, we had all kinds of firepower. I was on an attack transport. We had troops, we had all kinds of ammo, we had tanks. My ship was nearly 700 feet long. It was a big ship.
What kind of ship were you on?
An attack transport,
Okay. Yeah.
AK-99. And the name of it was named after Constellation Bootes, but we call it the Boots, B-O-O-T-E-S. They had the Mizar and the former Hawk. They had all of them were named after all these ships kind of ships that I was on was named after constellations.
Okay, and the purpose of your ship was?
Well, we carried supplies and men right up to the close to the beach and let them off in these LCVPs, and they would go on an invasion. And we couldn't dig a hole, but we could get the hell out of there.
What? How many battles or?
Well, after Lady Gulf, we went through the Surigao Straits around and then went in on Mindanao. We had to go to Australia. Australia was only a couple of days away. And we would go there and load and get whatever we needed. But it would take a month or two before it took us 2 years to take the Philippines back. But we went on all those invasions. We went on Mindanao, then we went to Mindoro, then we went to Subic Bay, and then Lingayen Gulf. All that took time. And in the between invasions, we'd have to go reload.
Did y'all have any?
We went to Sydney or Brisbane.
Did you have encounters with the Japanese as far as their?
We had air encounters. We had some. We never did get when we were in Orlando. When we were in Hollandia, New Guinea, we had one torpedo come right into the bay, into the harbor, but it didn't get us. It was I forget what happened, but anyhow, we had a lot of encounters, aircraft.
Now your older brother was in a different. Robert was on a different ship.
He was in the Atlantic theater, And then after that was, then he came over, he was on a DE, destroyer escort, came to, I'm trying to think of, I had it on the tip of my tongue.
So
There were so many islands out there, I can't remember where. But anyhow, I'll think of it in a minute. His ship was hit by a kamikaze. That's a Japanese suicide plane. And it threw him out in the water about 50 yards, and it really, it blew his intestines out. And they had a hospital over there, but it wasn't up to par. And all the wounded that they would take in over there, they did the best they could, but he for years he suffered after that.
Mm-hmm. What was your position on what was your?
I was a navigator, and that's my orders read to remove that navigator. And I tell you, I didn't know a whole lot about it. I'd worked out some star sites at Notre Dame on my test, and I did it good. But that was working out one, it'd take you an hour. But when our captain wanted his positions every day at 6 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock at night, and he wanted to know where we were. So I had 2 chiefs and a couple of other quarters. They knew more than I knew. They taught me after I got aboard. So then after about the first month or 2, I was in business. I knew how to do the whole thing. So thanks to the chiefs. The chiefs ran the Navy, whether you know it or not.
Where were you headed when? Tell me. So
We had a tough time. Our ship went through in the Philippines. I told you it took right at 2 years to get it back, and what was I going to say? We had a lot of attacks. We had 187 attacks. That was in our logbook. So there was no question about it.
So you were headed to Japan.
We left after Lingan Gulf. We left to go to Sydney, back to Sydney, Australia, to load up. It took us a month to load. We'd go back to Sydney and we'd load up, and we were going to Japan, invade Japan, but they dropped the bomb, the atomic bomb, President Truman. I'm not a Democrat, but I love President Truman because he saved out 1 million men. They said we'd have lost if we'd have gone back, if we'd have gone into Japan. That was a projected number, but it would have been at least that many.
So the Japanese were brutal. Well, they were brutal.
Well, they treated our prisoners so bad. One thing that made my blood boil was when we were in Manila and saw these, they were prisoners of war. They were just skeletons. I mean, they could hardly walk. And it just made your blood boil to see how they treated them. And we treated their people much better.
Okay, so the bomb was dropped, so that
ended the war.
Effectively ended the war.
That was, it dropped at 2 of them, one at Hiroshima and one at Nagasaki. And they didn't, the first one they dropped, they thought would be enough, but they didn't surrender, but they did another one and that did it. Killed a lot of Japanese people.
So at that point, what When did you get out of the
Okay, I
service?
got out of the Navy in June of '46. They dropped the bomb before that, of course. I got out, got out of the Navy in June of '46, went back to the University of Miami. That's the only school that would take all my credits, and I stayed there one semester and graduated in business administration. And that's where I met my wife, was that trip to Miami that time.
So you went back to Miami. You were how old?
23. I went in the Navy when I was 18. I was in the Navy 5 years. And I wouldn't take anything for being in it. It's really a great organization.
So you graduated from Miami. So how did you, at that point, how did you meet Dorothy?
Dorothy was a freshman. She was a sophomore, I believe. Yeah, she had been to Stellings and her father was sick, and she wanted to come back and be in Miami where they lived on Star Island, and that's where I met her.
Did somebody introduce y'all?
Well,
She had a-
Sam Perry, who was a good friend of mine and was in the Navy, and he was at Tech with me, and he was at Miami with me. We were kind of together a lot, and his mother said, "I want you to meet the Ogden girls." Said they went to Stellings with my daughter, and I can't think of her name. It's been so long. But anyway, Sam said, "I've got to go see her just to please my mother." I go see the Ogden girls, and I had the car. That's the first time I had my own car when I was 23. And we went to see the Ogden girls, and there were two of them. Dorothy was the oldest, and Betty was next. So we met them, but I was not impressed too much because they were so young. She was like 20, and 20. I was 3 years older. And I'd been all over the Pacific Ocean and in places somebody in that age didn't impress me too much. But we kept going back, and so things worked out that we went together after that. Not that year, but I was living up in Moultrie. I was working up there, and. But anyhow, we were married in '48, and I'd gotten out of Miami in '47.
Did you,
A year later.
did you get along with her parents early on, Mr. Ogden? I mean, obviously you had to ask for her hand in marriage.
Oh, yeah.
What did he say?
I said when I went in to ask him could we were going to get married, he said, "What did you say when she asked you?" He was being facetious, of course. I said, "Yeah, she didn't ask me, I asked her." But anyway, I got along very fine, very good with her father, and he was sick. And we moved up to Moultrie to go to work up there. We were there 6 months, and he got work. He never had a son, and he wanted me to come down there and help him out with their estate. They had a lot of property, and he just wasn't able to do it.
What was your wedding like? How many groomsmen did you have? Was it a big
Oh
wedding?
gosh, it was a big wedding. I had a bunch of my Georgia Tech boys. They're all gone now. But my oldest brother he was my only brother, was best man, and then I had probably 10 groomsmen. She had the same thing, and bridesmaids.
Okay. And how about her mother, your mother-in-law?
My mother-in-law was, we were not on the best best of terms, but the father-in-law and I were on excellent terms. She had a tendency to spoil, not Dorothy, but because Mr. Ogden, he kind of kept her under his wing. But Betty, the sister, she was spoiled. And some of the things that she asked me to do regarding Betty, I wouldn't do them because I didn't think it was in her best interest, and I didn't get along too good with her.
Okay. All right, and then, so y'all moved to Moultrie for a while. And
6
then-
months, and then he came up there and said, I need you to come down here, talk to my dad, and we all agreed. So we moved to Miami in July of '48.
Okay.
And lived there for 40 years.
So, so he kind of put you to work in
Property management.
Property management. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, they had about 50 tenants down there, and it was a deal you have never dreamed of. In Miami, it is not a. They have a melting pot of people down there. But anyhow, he had properties with tenants in them, and he was concerned about it, and that threw me in the briar patch. So I had to learn from kind of on my own. But he was a great help to me, and he did a lot of good things for me. That he never had a son, so he just kind of figured I was his son.
Okay. So your first house that you lived in?
Oh, the first house we lived in Moultrie was a rental house, a little house, and then we moved to Miami. We were in another little house on 1646 Southwest 16th Street, I remember it. And then we were on 17th Street for another year, and then we were out at Greenway. We didn't build our first house till 1956.
Okay, so the kids.
Then about, we built a house.
So talk about Dottie and Janie and myself.
Well, Dottie was born in a rental house, the first one. Janie was born in Greenway, which is a house we bought. We didn't build it, it was under construction when we bought it. She was born there. And then we built our big house on Granada, 3700 Granada, where you were born. And you were born in the Coral Gables Hospital, and they were born in the Jackson Memorial Hospital. That was the only one they had then. And then they built the one in Coral Gables. That's where you were born.
So we were all spaced.
Y'all were spaced
Pretty well.
about 4 years apart.
I know.
That was good.
Was that predetermined how many children you wanted to have, or you just kind of?
Sort of. I don't remember discussing that too much. I know that after you came, we had 2 girls, and we had you, that was a boy, that was it.
Okay. All right. So, so you were involved in business, but you were also involved with.
Well, I was involved locally with the University of Miami. I was on the board of trustees, and I was chairman of the athletic committee. And when I was chairman of the athletic, we won Miami. No, but you don't realize this. They won 5 national championships. The university did, and they hadn't done that since. But I enjoyed that, and they had good baseball teams and basketball. They had. I liked sports, and I was chairman of the athletic committee and of the board of trustees.
I remember you hiring a number of coaches. They were trying to find the right coach. They went through a number of coaches there.
First one we hired was Snellenberger, and he won our first national championship, beat Nebraska in the Orange Bowl. I was on the Orange Bowl committee for a long time, and I used to travel around, and they didn't have the situation like they do now. You invited who you want. And our goal was to invite the two best teams we could get. And we did that for years. And now, though, it's done by vote.
Yeah, preordained.
Yeah.
Tell me just a couple of trips you went on and maybe some of the coaches that you met over the
Well,
years.
the big, Joe Paterno at Penn State, you know, they came down and played in the Orange Bowl a lot, and I knew Joe real well. Unfortunately, he got involved with a situation at Penn State. Darrell Royal at Texas and Bear Bryant at Alabama, I knew them all, played golf with them, and we had to entertain them. And Hugh Devaney from Nebraska.
You coached Arkansas.
Well, I knew Frank. I was a teammate of Frank Rawls at Tech, and I knew him. But we never had them down while I was. We never had them in the Orange Bowl.
Well, I remember as a kid, you would take me to games, University of Miami
And
games.
I take you to the pro games too.
Well, we went to all the Dolphin games as a
Yeah.
kid. I remember going to like the first Dolphin game ever,
I remember.
1966.
Sometime back in there.
But we also went on the games to we went to West Point. And,
Oh yeah, I traveled with the team a lot.
yeah.
I went to Texas, and that's where I met Darrell Royal. I went to Texas, Penn State, West Point, Navy, wherever we were playing, I'd go, Mom and I'd
West
go.
Virginia, when Bobby Bowden
Yeah, I
was
went
coaching.
with West Virginia, and Pete Elliott was the head coach then.
So those were great years as far as
Oh, I had a ball.
learning a lot about sports.
Yeah, and
Just-
people that ran them.
Talk just briefly about the kids. Be really nice when you say whatever it is you're going to say about Dottie and Janie, but just a couple of
Well,
things.
Dottie and Janie, you know, they were in, the petticoat department was in charge of them. Mama was, but Dottie, she was a fan too. She went with me to all the games. Janie, I don't know, she just sort of,
That wasn't her bag.
wasn't her bag. She wanted to ride horses. But Dottie went with me on a lot of these games. Not out of town, but to the Orange Bowl. And Dorothy didn't care for it a whole lot. She and Janie, they would, I don't know, you know, Mr. What was Gasley was his name that
John
had
Gasley.
John Gasley had the horses out there in Carl Gate, right in downtown where the bus station is. This was his riding ring. That's how long ago that's been.
Wow.
But they were out riding horses. Dottie Lynn and I were going to football games.
There you go. Well, I remember as a little kid, we would throw the football in your bedroom.
Oh yeah.
That's one of my first memories, is
Yeah.
playing sports. Well, also, you guys were involved in a lot of philanthropic work, too. Talk about
Oh.
that, some of what Dorothy did.
Well, she was in the Heart Ball. I mean, she was the Heart Association, and she was in charge of the Heart Ball. She'd have some movie. The only one I remember very well was what his name was. He was a singer. Robert Goulet was his name, and she got him to come down and sing at the ball at this little on Miami Beach at one of the big hotels. I forget which one. But anyway, Robert Goulet, and she had Sammy Davis Jr. one year. It was interesting.
Yeah, we used to have a lot of parties at the house, I remember that.
Oh, yeah.
Big parties and raising money for charities and stuff.
Oh yeah. It was a never-ending thing.
Well, you certainly had a lot of friends, you know, just in the neighborhood across the street and down the street, Uncle Bill, Briggle, and the Martins and the Foggs and the Adams.
And
Talk
the Vessels.
about some of your friends.
Well, we lived across the street from Whitey Moore. He was a surgeon, chief of surgery at Mercy. And we had he was well, our dentist lived down the street and our lawyer lived around the corner. So we were pretty well bracketed with what we needed. And I don't know, it was a great place to come to live your life in Coral Gables. And we had a lot of very close friends. But we could do the same. We traveled a lot, to Europe, and I think Dorothy told me we went to Cuba 9 times before Castro came in. And you could get on that, you could either fly or you could get on the SS Florida and go over and stay up in the weekend, and it was like being in a foreign country. But anyhow, we also traveled a lot with the Fog. We had Fogs had a boat, a 73-footer. Can't think of what was the name of that thing.
The Milky Way.
Milky Way. And we had a dock at Chub Cay in the Bahamas, and we would go down there and spend a week and scuba dive, and for what Judy teaches now, we were floundering around.
Yeah. Well, you also went to Europe, because I remember as a kid, y'all went for like a month. We go on a ship or something.
We went on the QE2, and we went on to France, and we went on the, several ships. But the biggest thing is we went over on a ship and flew back on the Concorde.
Tell that story about when you were in Austria or wherever it was, you ran into the...
Oh my gosh. Well, when you go to a place, they take your passport first, and they look and see if everything's in order. And they get your name and where you're from, where you were born. So at my passport, we went to Mittersill in Austria. It was a castle. And we turned our passport in, and it showed Leonard Gerald Wright, Moultrie, Georgia. Well, the owner of the castle was Prince Lowenholt. He was a German, and he married this girl from Tiger, Georgia. I got what's the name?
Honeychild.
Honeychild Wilder. Honeychild Wilder looked on that. Where's this boy from Moultrie? I want to see him. So she was from Georgia, and I was from Georgia, and she said, "Oh, okay, well, you gonna eat dinner with us?" And well, anyhow, it was quite a 3-day stay.
And the owner, he wanted to shoot some.
He had an SS on his. I saw an SS. He was in the SS, German. He was in the Gestapo, and they wanted to shoot skeet, and they didn't know whether I'd ever shot a gun or not. Did I want to shoot? He said, "Well, we got somebody to shoot with you," and they had 2 other guys there, and they said, and Honeychild said, "Well, I'm gonna let you use one of my Purdy's." It was Purdy's a shotgun. She had a pair of Purdy's, P-U-R-D-Y. And I said, "What kind do you want?" And I said, "Well, I'll take the 20, double barrel 20 gauge if that's." Well, anyhow, we put some money on the line, and it wasn't much, like $10 or 15. But anyhow, we had a shooting contest, and they didn't do too good. I'd been shooting all my life, and that broke them from sucking eggs.
There you go. Well, let's transition into some business discussion, because you were involved in a number of different businesses. I would primarily family finance, because that goes way back.
Well, that came along when I was 50 years. That came along 20, 30 years later.
But I mean, when you're meeting Mr. Ogden and Mr. King, talk a little bit about them.
Well, they were partners.
They started that business.
They started back in 1926. They started Family Finance. It grew in, it took a shoestring into a tan yard. I mean, it was big. It was $600 million in net worth. And they had insurance, they had, it was a conglomerate is what it was. And they had banks, they had finance companies, they had insurance companies, furniture companies. Well, it was just a conglomerate of things, and it did well, except when the prime rate, they borrowed a lot of money. We had $300 million in credit lines, and when the prime rate went to 22 and a half, that was unheard of. I mean, it just never happened. Right now, the prime rate's like nothing hardly, 1.5, 2%.
That was a real aberration. Talk about what Mr. Ogden did and what Mr. King did in the business. How did they grow the business, and what were their responsibilities?
Well, the two of them made a good team. One of them, Mr. King, was in the PR. He was the head PR man. I mean, public relations, and he was the front man. Mr. Ogden was he was the watchdog of the Treasury. That's the only way. In the annual report, I remember it had his picture, and then it had watchdog of the Treasury. But Mr. Ogden was the one that made all the tough decisions, and Mr. King got credit for most everything. But Mr. Ogden without him, it wouldn't have been near what they had. But anyhow, on the side, they had some finance companies like United Operating Company, Bell Partnerships, and Southern Investors, and they had these other companies that were not a part of Family Finance. They were partnerships. Family Finance was a corporation, a public corporation. But anyhow, anytime anything came available, instead of him taking it, he'd let me take it. I mean, he wouldn't give me the money. I had to scrounge around for the money, but I was able to get it together. And I went into Bell Partnerships and United, and I had a pretty fairly good. By the time I was 40 years old, I was pretty well fixed.
So what did you learn from Mr. Ogden? I mean, what were his business principles? What did you learn from him?
He was just solid. He's just a solid businessman. I would give some people the doubt, but I don't think he ever gave too many doubts. I mean, he ran it by the book, and but he was well respected, but he wasn't liked like Mr. King. Mr. King was a different personality. But that's what it takes. They're both different. And as I say, they took a shoestring and built it into a tan yard with Family Finance and these other companies they had. They owned the bus company and all the Trailways bus company. And Mr. Ogden wanted me to go up there and run and be I was on the board, but I wasn't old. I was only like 28 to 9 years old, and I didn't know enough about a bus company. But anyway, my father-in-law, if it hadn't been for him, I wouldn't have done as well.
So he kind of
took me under his wing, and he didn't pursue much business interest. He'd always see if I wanted to get involved.
And then, so when you were about 50 is when you took over running that?
I was 50, I took over, I became chairman and president of Family Finance. The other stuff was personal. I mean, it was partnerships with family members and so forth.
And then you were involved with First National Bank of Miami, I remember that.
Not Florida.
Florida National.
Florida National.
You were on the board of Florida National. So that had to be a pretty good learning experience.
He was trustee of the DuPont estate. Trying to think of his name. You're going back so far, JR, and you're taxing my pea brain.
I understand, you're doing good. Florida National was a pretty good, that was a pretty solid
They
bank.
had banks all over Florida. That was in the DuPont estate. And,
Oh, Mr. Ball.
Ed Ball. Oh,
Yeah.
and he was probably, when I was 50, he was probably 75. And he always called me Mr. Wright. I expected him to call me by my first name, Mr. Wright. But anyway, no, we had, I think there was 50 or 60 banks we had in Florida. And that was the Alfred I. DuPont. And I was involved with that. In fact, I had an office in the DuPont building before I moved over to the family finance.
Then I know you got involved in the welding company.
Oh, that was a personal thing that a friend of mine, John McDonald, and I can't think of the other boy. This man, he was about 80 years old, and 80 ain't as old as I thought it was. But he wanted to sell it, and he ran it out of his garage, and it wasn't, he was selling gases to the airlines for their tires. He was selling oxygen to the hospital, and he was buying it from a National Cylinder Gas Company, but we bought that business and didn't, it was a very small business. And Walter Mahaney from Savannah, when he came down, we sold him half of it or more, and he took it, and we started from there manufacturing our own gases, and they ran that up into a pretty big company, because we were selling all down South America and all over the world. But we were selling mainly to the airlines and to the hospitals when we started, and it just blossomed out.
And then eventually Walter's son, Dick Mahaney, came in and
Yeah, he's a Georgia Tech graduate.
Mhm.
And he went to Vietnam. He won the Bronze Star or all kinds of medals. But he ran it for us till he's not doing well now.
Right, and then you eventually sold it.
Yeah, we eventually sold it.
And then in the 60s, you decided to buy some property.
Oh, that was I wanted some timberland, and I wanted a place to hunt. So Bobby Ward, my lawyer, one of my lawyers, found a place up at Leesburg, Florida, outside of Leesburg, Florida, about 13 miles, belonged to the Knowles Company. And I looked around, I looked over at Naples, and I looked all over Fort Myers places and all, and I just didn't find what I wanted. Well, we finally went up and looked at this place and bought it the next day. So that was our ranch that we bought, a pretty place. And when we closed the ranch, the lawyer said, this is the prettiest place in Sumter County. And they said, then they got their own JR too. That was JR up in the television show.
That was 1967, and that was
Yeah.
about the same time that Disney was doing their thing in Orlando.
Oh, yeah.
And they secretly bought all that land.
Roy Rogers came and looked at our place. He wanted to buy it. We could have said, no, we don't want to sell it. He and, what was Dale?
Dale Evans.
Dale Evans said, but he wanted to buy it.
You bought that. Talk a little bit about what you did with it and how you used it and what.
Well, we had cattle, we bought cattle and put them on there and built up a herd. But the main thing was that I paid for that thing, I'd cut timber. I'm gonna tell you the figures I think are right. We put 200,000 down, we bought 10,000 acres. But there was only 8,200 that we paid for, and the other was on a lease. So we had a 10,000 acre place, but owned 8,200. But anyhow, we made a deal with the Knowles, interest only for 2 years, and we paid it off in 15. So that was doable because we had all this timber. And we would have to cut just a small portion to make a payment after the 2 years. So we went through that and paid it off, and as I say, we paid $90 an acre for it, or 100 or whatever it was, and sold it for $7,000 an acre. So it would turn out to be a pretty good investment.
We used to take your friends up there and you would go quail hunting.
Oh, I'd take all the football coaches and that came to the Orange Bowl, Ernie McCoy and Ed Checkeye, all that, but they'd come, that's why they wanted to come to Florida, so they could go to the ranch and hunt turkey and quail.
So tell me about, you've always been like having dogs and pets, and talk to me about, I know when I was a kid, I remember you had a bird dog. Talk about some of the pets that you used to have.
Well, before that, in Moultrie, when I came up, I lived in Moultrie 17 years, and that was it. But during my childhood, we had a little dog, fox terrier named Kiddo, and we got him when he was about a year old, and we kept him till, I remember we went to camp when we were like 14, and when we came back he had passed away, and that was one of the traumas of my life. I couldn't understand why he was 15 years old, and they don't live much longer than that, but I just couldn't figure it out why they let him die. And he died at the vet's, but anyway, that was the only little dog I ever had. The rest were bird dogs. The ranch, we had 15 pointers and setters, and we had a very nice kennel and took care of them. But we had bird dogs galore at the ranch, and we had cow dogs, and so we had a lot of pets. We had that little Harley Davidson. Why they named it, he was a little hound.
He was a beagle.
Beagle, and his name was Harley Davidson. How they named him?
He was a character.
And he would take off and chase something, and you could hear him a mile or two away in the woods down there barking at something. But anyhow, he was a house dog. He stayed around. He didn't stay in the kennel. He stayed in. All of a sudden, he'd take off some nights and go out looking around.
Now, when I was a little kid, I remember you had your own bird dog at the house.
Oh yeah, right.
Granada.
Yeah. As I say, I had one, Bobby Ward had one, and Alan had one. And that's when the three of us, we'd go over to our place. We had a place over to Immokalee. Off of the trail. Immokalee was a farming community, a little old farming community. Well, anyhow, we leased this land for 10 cents an acre. We had 10,000 acres. We had quail, turkey, deer, but 10 cents an acre back in those days. This was in the early 50s, and we got an old shack from Bud Wheeler. He was a contractor. They had a work shack where we took it over, dismantled it and took it over there and put it together. We'd go over there and stay 2 or 3 days. We'd take the wives with us. And we had these double bed,
Bunk
bunk
beds.
beds, yeah. But it was quite, that was a lot of fun.
Well, you had, I know you had Brittany. Well, let's talk about Dorothy's dog. She had some dogs.
She had the best dog she ever had. She bought in Cuba and named it Cuba. And it was so smart, it was really smart. I didn't know about it because I didn't know in those days. But Mr. Ogden used to tell me about it. That dog was practically human. And it was, but I didn't have any, I didn't ever see it died before we married.
And then you bought the little toy poodle, which was
Baba the Sexy.
What's the story behind that?
Well, she was only 3 pounds. That's how big she was. And Dorothy thought she was her dog, but she was my dog. She was Dorothy's dog when I wasn't there, but of course I used to travel a lot. And, but anyhow, Baba the Sexy was named after a prince, a couple, as I told you before, we had a big Air Force base there in Moultrie called Spence Field, and they trained French pilots. And this, what was his name? He was in charge, and he was married to this French girl. They lived in Moultrie. I can't think of his name, but anyway, her name was Baba. So when we got the little dog, Dorothy named her Baba the Sexy. That was the girl's name from France. So
I remember one time we had an Airedale. That thing was dumb as a post.
we had a German Shepherd too.
Oh yeah.
I remember Billy Vessels came to pick me up one morning to go play golf. And man, I heard this noise down there, and Prince was raised. We had him on a chain as a watch, kind of a watch, but he was on duty. When he was on duty, he was barking at Billy. I said, "Well, Billy, what'd you call him? Anything?" He said, "I called him sir." Billy Vessels was a good friend of mine. He was a Heisman Trophy winner out of Oklahoma.
He lived around the corner.
He lived around the corner.
And that leads me to another thought, because you had some folks that worked for you in Coral Gables. Roscoe and Anna.
Roscoe and Anna, they were married, yeah. They were married. They were a couple we had. We had Lizzie, and what was the other girl?
Ruby.
Huh?
Ruby.
Yeah, Dorothy. We had a big house that we had built. It was 10,000 square feet. That's a big house. Because we entertained so much. We had a lot of people working in our companies, and we had to have them around, so we had a big house. But anyway,
Roscoe's real name, his real name, you remember his real name?
Russell.
Rossell Neesmith Obadiah Johnson.
I knew
And he
it.
always had that big cigar in his mouth.
Yeah. He had worked for some people in Chicago. He was from Cordele, Georgia. And he and Anna worked for these people in Chicago, and they came to Miami Beach every year, and they were friends of Mr. and Ms. Ogden's. John and Simile were this couple. Well, anyhow, Roscoe said, "Mr. Wright, I sure would like to come back down south. And if you got a play," I said, "I gotta talk to Ms. Wright about it, Roscoe." And sure enough, she said, "Okay, we'll take you." And so we had Roscoe. He raised y'all, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely. And they lived in the house.
Oh yeah, we had nice quarters, servant quarters for him.
So he always had a cigar in his mouth. He never lit it, but he always had it in his mouth.
Yeah.
He just chewed on it.
Yeah, Roscoe was a character.
Yeah, absolutely. So then back to the pet thing, I got off track there, but you had Brittany.
Darcy, she was a wonderful little dog, best retriever. I took her to the ranch, and she was unbelievable. I mean, I didn't even train her or anything. I just took her out with me, and when we would shoot a bird down or cripple, she wouldn't leave till she got it. And she was quite a retriever, and a good little bird dog, because she found cubbies too.
Yeah, at that time, I think that all the family members had a Brittany.
Yeah.
Janie had 2.
Jenny had 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we had Darcy, but we had a lot of other
And
bird
then you
dogs.
got
Slipper.
Slipper, the
Lab,
Labrador.
very fine dog. She was good on retrieving ducks and quail. I mean, anything.
Yep. And then I remember the little bitty dog that showed up. We found it in a ditch.
That was Weenie.
It was this big. It was a little
It's a cross between a
Dachshund.
dachshund and something
a
else.
miniature dachshund.
Yeah, something.
And,
She was so little.
But she was smart.
She would go, and then we'd miss her sometime at the house, and the cloister would call up and says, your dog is down here. Weenie would go down there and bark at squirrels. They had squirrels in the front yard of the cloister. And we'd go down there and they'd have her in the closet waiting for us to come get her. She would take off every night and go down, but you know what happened to it, a yellow jacket or something, she snapped at and it got in her throat and it stung her and we couldn't save her.
Yeah. Well, so in the mid 70s, you all decided you've been traveling a lot, going to Sea Island, and then you decided to buy a house in Sea Island.
We did. I was still working. Dorothy came up, we let people use it a lot. We didn't use it too much, but we didn't really move up here till 80.
Talk about when you bought it and who you bought it from and where it's located.
It's on 12th Street in the ocean on the beach, and we bought it from the
Mr. Grace.
Grace and Company people. What was the one with Charles and his wife? He had a problem. He was I don't know what you call it, but he couldn't speak too well, but he was smart. I mean, he could get it over. And I had to deal with his brother, Peter Grace, and who was a nice fella. He was the one that was on that started the Grace Commission for the government and tried to
Cut waste out of the government.
cutting expenses, and they never listened to him. But anyway, we bought it from Charles Grace and his wife, and that was in '73. And it didn't have an upstairs, so we added the upstairs, and we added the solarium room, and I don't know how big that was. I don't know. I think it ended up about 8,000 or 9,000.
So at that point, you decided to sell your house down in Coral Gables,
Yeah,
which eventually sold in '76, I think.
something like that.
So you guys moved.
We had 3 places at one time. We had the one in Coral Gables, we had the ranch, we had 5 houses at the ranch. And we had the one at Sea Island, so we had to get rid of some of that stuff. But we sold the one in Coral Gables. But we lived there for about 20-something years. That's how long we lived there. Were you in Auburn?
I remember, I went to
You
college
came-
in 1976, so I remember coming home for spring break one
One
time.
time.
So I'm thinking you sold it in '77.
So,
when
that's
it
about
closed.
right.
And then we would always gravitate to Sea Island after that. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about Mimi. We haven't really said much about Mimi. We need to talk a little bit about her. Why don't you just talk about some of her attributes and
Well, she Dorothy and Betty both were adopted. And Ms. Ogden, she was just smitten with babies. She loved babies. If you ever went in her house, there has a bunch of dolls all over the place and on the piano. Well, anyhow, they adopted Betty and Dorothy, and Mr. Ogden kind of took control of Dorothy because he had horses, you know. And Dorothy rode in Madison Square Garden in New York, in those horse shows. He'd take her up there. She had a room full of blue ribbons where she'd won. She was, and then at Pace's Ferry Road in Atlanta, where they lived and is now the school, we donated that property to the school. They had stables, they had riding rings, they had riding pads. There was 33 acres back there. Well, anyhow, he took Dorothy and he didn't make her, but he made her into a horse person. Betty would not ride. She was afraid of horses, and her mama said that she didn't want her to ride. So Mr. Ogden raised Dorothy, Ms. Ogden raised Betty. That's the bottom line. So I got the best end of the deal. But anyway, I got along with Ms. Ogden fine, except I just couldn't see. I just didn't agree with how she was raising her daughter.
So what were some of Mimi's best attributes? I mean, what attracted you to her?
Well, she had a heart big as I don't know what. They had some people that worked on the place up in Atlanta. They had a house back up on the side of the hill, and those little girls, Dorothy would Ms. Ogden and Mr. Ogden said, you know, Dorothy would end up taking them some of her clothes. She was so good-hearted. She ended up giving away a lot of her good clothes to those children. That was one story that I did.
Maybe it's because she was adopted.
She was adopted.
And she didn't...
She just had you know, she just wanted to help people. Because she said she remembered, she was 3 years old when they adopted her. And she remembers mountains when she would take a bath outside in a tub. She'd remember, so it was in Tennessee where she was. And, but she never made any attempt to find out who her parents or anybody was, but Betty did. Betty found out, and they had 8 children in Betty's family. And she met her brothers, 2 of her brothers, and the rest of them, I don't know. But anyhow, Dorothy said, no, I'm satisfied with what I got. I don't want to go any further. She didn't want to find out who her real biological mom and dad were. So, then we left it at that. But Betty did. Betty found out who and she's born in Rome, I think, her family was.
Wow. So talk about your family and your extended family, your kids and your grandkids.
Oh, we got 20 of them, man. How many we got? Let's see. Great-grands and grands. I don't know how many. Well, let's see. There's 3 of y'all. And then y'all produced, then Janie, I think there's 15 or 20 of them when you count all of them together. I know their names, but I don't know their birthdays. I got it written down, the accountants got it written down. But anyhow, we were one family, a lot of our families, I'm not going to call any names, but our friends, they had nothing but trouble. We have never had one bit of trouble with any of our children or grandchildren. Now that's saying a lot. And they just did, oh, I'm not saying they didn't do things, we just didn't catch them. But they will do it, and you take somebody like Huntley, his daddy died, and so he's in our family. I mean, Huntley's a member of our family, and JR knows all about him, because they were they were raised together. But our family, we've got all of Becky's children, and I'd have to count them up, JR.
Well, I guess we've been blessed that we haven't had any kind of divorces or anything like that.
We hadn't had any problems, that's what I'm saying. You take some of our friends, I get them out of jail, we take them to the ranch, and the first thing you know, they're down in the county jail.
So what would you say to your grandchildren, as far as, you know,
Well,
anything that you'd like to say to them?
I think they've been mighty strong, that's what I think. And Becky, and they all Becky and Ann, and one of them, Becky, graduated from Virginia Tech. Ann graduated from Virginia. You graduated from Auburn. John Robert graduated from Georgia Tech. All of them have been good students and made Dorothy and I real proud.
Yep.
So
what about the church? Tell me how that has played into your life.
the church, that was us from the get-go, JR. From the time I was born, we were in the church. We went to Sunday school, and then we went to church. And then when Dorothy and I and y'all came, we did the same thing. We went to Sunday school and we went to church when we were raised. And then when we got up here, Dorothy and I were in the Methodist church, and then we with Al Baker. They started Dorothy was a Presbyterian when we married. We were married in the Presbyterian church, but I was a Methodist all my life. And I changed over to Presbyterian because of Al Baker when we built this church out here.
Golden Isles.
Golden Isles Presbyterian. We were there 11 years and helped them get it started. And then Al Baker left, and then after Mama passed away, I went back to Methodist. So I've been in the church all my life, except recently, in the last couple of years, I hadn't been able to get there. But we've always been big in the church. That's all I can say.
And as far as one of your John Robert had a couple questions about your business career and just philosophies of business. What do you think is important?
Jim, I don't know how to, I would say that you'd say, well, I am not a self-made man, because my father-in-law took me under his wing, and he was fortunate enough to have some things going, and anytime anything came up that we had the right to, he would let me have it. And I just was in a posture where I could fortunately borrow the money and go into it. I had to pass up some stuff too. But anyway, I had a lot of help along the way, and I feel like that's why I like to help some other people when I can.
Well, First Federal, we didn't talk about First Federal. That was when we moved up here to this area. You got involved with First Federal Savings Bank. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, Ben Slade came to me and asked me would I go on the board with First Federal, whenever it was back in the 80s. And I said, well, I've been on boards, I'm not horsing to be on a board. But he said, well, maybe you could help us a little bit. So I went on the board, to make a long story short. And I stayed there. At that time, Federal Savings and Loan Associations were having real trouble. They had made some bad loans or something.
Interest rates went up.
Interest rates went up. Well, anyhow, we were able to buy the First Federal. So we put our money, we were the biggest stockholder at that time. And so I bought into it and went on. I said, I'm not going on the board unless we have an interest in it. So we bought an interest in it, majority interest in it. And that time was Ben Slade was president, John Rogers, and Robert Strange, and Jim Gash, all of them officers, and they were a great bunch. They did a good job. We got an opportunity, CNS came down and wanted to buy us. So we made a deal with them. But in the meantime, CNS, something happened.
They sold out to Nations Bank.
Yeah, that's what happened, and so we were in the pot.
And then Nations Bank became Bank of America.
That's correct. And it was one of the best. Our stock went from like 20-something to 80-something. But then Bank of America got into some trouble. They're going to be okay now, but all the banks had a problem for a while. And but we're still involved with Bank of America.
So you think it's harder to do business now than it used to be?
Yeah, it's a lot harder. And the opportunities, when I was coming along, like I told you, I paid $90 for the $100 or whatever it was, $90-something for the property in Leesburg. You can't touch anything now for less than $500 an acre. And it doesn't seem to me to be the opportunities that it used to be. But after my father-in-law died is when we did better. We went into the ranch, we went into, but through having him as a tutor, I knew how to do it. I knew how to get involved. And it's just, as I say, I didn't do it all on my own. I have to admit that.
Well, and also we got involved in the TV station. That was something that was probably not one of our better deals.
We should have never gone into that, but we got out of it. Yeah, thanks to you and Grady, y'all got us some people to buy us out. And we didn't lose any money. But I think we did lose, though.
Some opportunity costs, things that came along.
We couldn't use some properties we had that we had to sell. But anyway, it wasn't a bad deal.
So over the years, you've had some pretty good people that you've worked with. You know, I think back about Billy Kaufman and Eddie Spies at the ranch, and these people that were with you. You
got to think further back than that. When you got to go back to Miller and Bill Paul and that bunch that ran the business. I was very close to them. And so, well, anyway, you know.
Well, you have to get along with people, you know, in order to do business in most cases.
Yeah, one of the big problems I had with Walter Mahaney was he thought we were better than we were. I mean, I had to pick up the slack sometime. When I'm talking about the welding business, we bought some companies in Dade County that we wouldn't have been able to buy because Walter he didn't use much of his person. He didn't, I had to step in
Yeah.
to do it.
All right. Well, do you have any words of advice for, your grandkids as far as you've got
Well-
some young, and you've got another generation of kids coming up between Wright and Ogden and John Robert and Justin that are gonna be running all this stuff here pretty soon. What would you say to
Well,
them?
I tell you, I am very, very comfortable with John Robert, what he's doing. He's doing it, he's gonna make some mistakes, but he's also gonna do good, John Robert. And Justin is a graduate of North Carolina. He's not one of my favorite sport adversaries, but he's gonna do good. And I got them involved in the finance business, and I think they've got 2 or 3 offices. I don't know.
And Wright's just graduated with his master's.
Wright graduated from FSU in May, and he's going with Bank of America, and I can't believe what they're start them on now. When I started, you know what a banker you were lucky to get $500 a month. Now he's getting $100,000 a year plus a signing bonus. I never heard of such a thing. It's all different now. But he's a good man. He was in the military. The military helped him. He was in the military 6 years. It helped him a lot. Wright's gonna do okay. Augie likes the outdoors. He's gonna be like what I'd like to be. Out and handling he's with Frederica Township, and he's in charge of the boathouse and the fishing, and that's what he likes.
Yep, and Becky just graduated from
Becky's an anesthesia. What is she?
a nurse anesthetist.
That's what she is. But she starts off at 120. And of course, inflation is eating us up. And everything now is not like it used to be. When I was coming along, when you could get a loaf of bread for 10 cents and buy a gallon of gasoline for 15 cents, it's all gone. I mean, that ain't gonna happen. But anyway.
So you enjoying being out here in Marsh's Edge?
Oh, I love them. I think Marsh's Edge is a great place for us old folks. I didn't like living over on Sea Island by myself. I got a lot of friends out here. Well, most of them came from Sea Island. A lot of them did. Now they're coming from all over. But we're getting about, I don't know, last month I think we got 8 or 10. And the biggest problem they have is selling their house before they can come. So, but it's working out very nicely. And everybody out here is friendly, and it's good.
You once told me you wanted to be a football coach.
Yeah, but I want to eat too. I would, they started them out, Gerald, when I was playing. I don't know what they paid them, but they paid them probably $1,000 a month. Now it's all up in the big bucks now. I would have liked to have been, I'd like to have worked with young men, yeah. If you could have, but you just have to do what you have to do. And that was not in the cards when I was coming along.
Do you have any regrets about anything?
Well, I think it would have been a lot of fun if my twin brother hadn't gotten killed, and he could have been in the family going to hunting and so forth and that with me. That I regret.
Well, you keep telling me you want us to buy some timberland.
Yeah, but I don't know where you're gonna get it. Where you can do it like I did it. I mean, I don't know what it's going for now, but it's not cheap. I think I'd like to see Wright go on the Sloan Properties buy some. I don't know how to go about it now with the prices so inflated. We just keep.
Maybe there'll be an opportunity to come down the
Yeah,
pike, you know? You just have to
might be.
keep your powder dry, right?
Yeah. might be.
Okay, well, we're gonna wrap this up. And,
Okay.
appreciate your time.
All right, I can't think of anything else.
We've covered the waterfront pretty well.
The one thing that I spent a lot of time on was out in Butler every summer. We would go, whether we went to camp or not, we'd still find time to go to Butler.
And it's funny, you drive through there to get to Auburn and stop off. All right, good.
Okay,